started with today's episode, I would like to quickly read you our podcast disclaimer. This podcast is for educational purposes only, and it is not to substitute for professional care by a doctor or other qualified medical professional. You should always speak with your physician or other healthcare professionals before doing any fasting, changing your diet in any way, taking or adjusting any medications or supplements, or adopting any treatment plan for a health problem. The use of any other products or services purchased by you as a result of this podcast does not create a healthcare provider-patient relationship between you and any of the experts affiliated with this podcast. Any information and statements regarding dietary supplements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration and are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. All right, and now we'll get started with today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Fasting Method podcast. This is Coach Terri Lance, and this is a solo episode. I wanted to talk with you today about a couple of topics that have been coming up a lot lately with my clients and in the TFM community. So I thought it would be worthwhile to talk with you here in the podcast about them. The first one is a very common question. Clients have been asking, people have been asking in larger community group meetings and in the forum. It's a question that might seem kind of obvious, but I think the answer is worth kind of finessing a little bit. The question is, does it ever get easier? And sometimes people are asking about fasting and maybe increasing their fasting length. Maybe they're talking about, increasing to a 24-hour or a 36 or a 48 or an extended fast. And so they ask, does it ever get easier? Do you ever get to the point where you're not thinking about breaking your fast or thinking about food the whole time? Sometimes the question is about food. Oftentimes people who are really working on their health and weight loss are focusing on what foods work well for their body and what foods don't. And the foods that don't, they work on either minimizing their consumption of them or possibly even eliminating them. So again, the question comes up, does it ever get easier? Does it ever get easier to not have dessert after a meal when everyone else around you is eating something more problematic? Does it ever get easier going to restaurants and ordering the food that works for you rather than what everyone else in your group is ordering? So you may find that you've been wondering some of these things as you are working on building your fasting skills and addressing your food choices. I wish I had one simple answer to share, but instead, like I said, I think this deserves a little bit of kind of digging in. One of the reasons questions like this sometimes are challenging is because it depends on who you ask and when you ask them. Now, I'm at a point in my fasting career where if someone says, does fasting ever get easier? Really quickly, I can give a resounding, yes, it does. But that doesn't mean for everyone it does, or that it does in the same ways. For me, getting beyond the 24-hour mark is no longer something that I have much of a response to. When I'm fasting, I prefer an alternate day fast because once I'm in the fast, I'm not thinking about food. Now, what I do on an eating day, that's a whole different thing, but the fasting day itself actually has become a lot easier for me. But I've been doing this for a long time. And so you might find in your journey, there may be times where you notice it is getting easier. I've even had some clients recently who were surprised early on how much easier some of their fasts were than they expected them to be. Now, of course, many people experience it's challenging to fast for so many reasons. And they use the fasting aids and they use all of the support that we talk about, and they still find it to be challenging. One of the reasons I wanted to say that is because I think sometimes this is one of those examples where people compare themselves. If they hear someone in a podcast episode, or if they hear someone in one of our TFM community group meetings that says that fasting is easy for them, they may look at themselves and their experience and feel down or feel frustrated that why is it easy for someone else but difficult for them? And what I want to encourage you is that it varies. For many people, aspects of it get easier. Some aspects may not. For example, if you live with a family, what you do during mealtime on your fasting days, you might find that that's always a challenging time. And I'm going to address that in a moment in the second half of this podcast on a different topic. And then the other one, again, as I said, people question, is making the changes that I'm making with my food choices, is that ever going to get easier? Am I ever going to not want that food? Am I ever not going to think about it fondly and wish that I were eating it? And again, my answer is it varies. One of the things that I think helps so many people with this is that if they find foods that work well for their body, that they enjoy, the intensity of missing other foods, and generally for most of us, those are more processed foods or just in general more problematic foods. If we are enjoying our food when we eat, there's less space for feeling deprived or feeling like we're just not enjoying food because we stopped eating a certain thing or we stopped eating a certain category of foods or a certain way. So making sure that as you select your approach to eating, that you make sure that the foods you eat are foods that you like. Now, I think there's a big difference between enjoying what we eat and being entertained, or it being the biggest highlight of our day. I think for many of us, those things get us in trouble with food. But enjoying your food, I think, is a healthy approach, and many of us have to work on that. About 8 months ago, a little over 8 months maybe when this episode comes out, I stopped eating sugar. And one thing that I have found since I stopped eating it is that I actually think about it a lot less than when I was eating it. And that might sound weird because some of us, when we maybe eliminate or stop engaging with certain foods, we think about them a lot. And of course, in the beginning, I did. But at this point, it is on my radar so less frequently. And I often share this example, again, in community meetings and with my clients. When I go places where the sugary things that I would have eaten in the past are available, I am surprised how little it affects me now. Now, there have been other times in my life where I wasn't doing sugar, and I avoided them. I kept my distance from those scenarios where sugar was available and flowing freely. But even just today, I walked through a grocery store, and I was heading to get some meat and cheese, and where this store has that section located, you have to walk through the bakery. There's really no way to get there unless you go right through the bakery. Now, I'm sure that's intentional on their part, but in the past, if I was attempting not to be eating sugar often due to my health and my weight and, my overall self-care goals, I would have found it difficult. It would be like walking the bakery gauntlet, just struggling with each step, looking at each thing that I'm not going to buy, or maybe I should. And I would have all of this energy wrapped up in thinking about it, debating, reminiscing, being irritated, being sad, all of these things. And what I found recently, I have found that when I walk through, I just think, oh yeah, I remember when I used to eat those things. And today, I noticed that I really didn't even look down. And it wasn't because I was running the gauntlet and just trying to quickly get to where the meat and cheese were. But I really just kind of looked around almost like they didn't matter. because they're not my food. And some of you know that's a saying that I've promoted for many years. But today it really became clear to me. Those baked goods, those sugary items are no longer my foods. And so there's no pleasure even in looking at them and reminiscing and debating. Just like I don't eat fish. And so when I go by the fish section, I don't stop and gaze at each fish and think about, ooh, would I like that one or that one? And oh, remember when I had that before? Now, sugar items are starting to feel like that. So I say this not because it's going to work the same for all of us, but because I want you to know that it's possible that it feels different over time. Anything we do initially feels one way, and if we do it long enough, we often have a different experience of it. So I want to encourage you that as you think about your fasting, going longer hours between meals, doing TRE, time-restricted eating consistently, and even making different choices of foods, that it can become easier. But I also always want people to know, based on why these things are so complicated for us, it never surprises me when someone says, I still think about it. I compare that to something like when someone stops smoking. Oftentimes, I've talked to ex-smokers who will say, every now and then, I finish a nice meal, and for a moment, I think about wanting a cigarette because that was one of their favorite times to smoke. Or when they get really stressed out at work, it goes through their mind that this is when they would like to go outside and take a cigarette break. Now, they don't do these behaviors because it's no longer part of their life, but it doesn't mean that the urge doesn't exist. So I want to encourage you to really just accept and continue to work on, I can resist urges. I can do something in place of acting on the urges. And I don't need the urge to go away in order to be successful. I think that you will find over time that the urges lose some of their power. And the less often you engage them, the more power they lose. So the other topic that I wanted to talk about today is an idea that is talked about so commonly now in so many circles, in podcasts, in books, in TED Talks, and the topic is self-care. For the past couple of months, I would say, I've been using this term more and more because I feel like it's the really positive, moving us forward in our goals way of talking about all of these behaviors. And self-care, for most of us, I hope, has a positive connotation. It doesn't sound like deprivation. It doesn't sound difficult or painful. And it's what we're really trying to do. If you say, well, I want to be fasting and eating differently because I want to live longer and keep my mobility longer. I want to avoid developing 5 chronic health concerns in the next 10 years. I want to keep my weight at a healthy place for me so that I feel free in my body and can be active. I want to wear those certain clothes or whatever your reasons are. All of that is self-care. It's how are you taking care of your body? How are you taking care of your mind? And how are you taking care of your emotions? Now, why is it that self-care gets talked about so often at TFM? You may have heard in other episodes references to the idea that this is more about a lifestyle rather than a diet. And I really want to emphasize, I think for most of us, when we think of dieting, it doesn't sound like self-care. It sounds really difficult. It sounds a little punishing and does not sound like fun. So it tends to have like that almost dread response when we think about it. But working on developing healthy habits and a healthy lifestyle, that helps us to feel the way we want to feel and helps our body to work the way we want our body to be able to work. That doesn't sound negative. That doesn't sound punitive or dreadful. So I encourage you to really focus. What you are working on is self-care. Now, one of the complexities of the concept of self-care, I think, is how we've all learned about self-care and what we have learned to consider self-care acts. So, for example, someone has a really stressful day at work. They stop and they get their favorite dessert on the way home, thinking, I deserve to feel good tonight. I deserve to get out of this bad mood that I'm in from that stress at work. So I deserve this dessert. Rather than, how can I take care of myself? I'm frustrated. I'm stressed. We go to this, I need to amuse myself with food. I need to calm myself with food. All of these other ways that food is used problematically, because no one that I've ever talked to means I'm really stressed, so I'm going to go soothe myself with broccoli. We've learned that soothing or treating or rewarding, any of those words, that it's about problematic things that give us that dopamine hit or that just kind of numb us out for a little bit. So the other day in the TFM community meeting, someone brought in this thing that they had heard in another podcast and then shared the source. And it was just this beautiful statement about self-care. And the reason I think it was so powerful, it was definitely one of those mic drop moments, is that what the author was talking about was that in what this community member shared, that this author had said or had written, is that we really have to look at it differently, because sometimes we think of self-care as those really plush feeling things like a bubble bath and a cushy robe and a nice box of chocolates. That's what we think of sometimes when we say self-care. And in actuality, for many of us, based on our health and what's going on with our weight and various things going on for us, those are actually harmful things. Or if not harmful, at least not moving us forward. Maybe making us feel better for a moment or two, or maybe 15, but not really moving us forward in our lives. And so what this author had said basically is, sometimes self-care, it's really the unbeautiful things. It's turning your car in the other direction and not going through that drive-through. It's sitting down with your friends who are eating on your fasting day and only having water. Now, again, none of these things are horrible forms of self-punishment, but they're certainly not as much fun as some of the other options. And for many of us, they're not how we think self-care would look. But self-care is doing the things that helps you build the life that you want, the health that you want, the longevity that you want, the body composition that you want. So I encourage everyone to start thinking about, what is self-care? What do you mean when you think of the phrase self-care? Are you choosing things that feel good, calm you or soothe you, or are entertaining or fun or enjoyable in the moment, but lead to consequences that you don't like? For example, when I was talking about those sugary baked goods, I enjoyed those a lot. And it was easy to think that that was me being nice to myself. But when I look at the resulting blood sugar and the years of medication and everything that came with that, now suddenly buying myself one of those treats doesn't really feel like self-care. It really feels like I'm doing something to interfere with my goals or maybe even harm myself. So I encourage you to start thinking about, how are you using that phrase? What is self-care to you? And some of it may be that bubble bath, or buying those nice cushioned slippers. But when it comes to taking care of your body, taking care of your mind and your emotions, are you engaging in self-care? And what would this journey feel like if you reframed it that I'm going to do things that serve me, that actually are self-care? Because many times when people are struggling with what foods to eat and wanting to eat things that are problematic for them, this is part of the problem, because they're caught up on, but that feels like self-care because I enjoy them. My family and I enjoy them together, so clearly that's good for me. That's a good self-care thing. But if it's causing me to have more health concerns, or if it's causing me to gain weight or be unable to lose weight, is that self-care? And can I look at things differently? What can I do for self-care? What can I do to ease stress when I've gone through a difficult day? What can I do to reinforce things that I'm proud of, that I've achieved? I want to challenge everyone listening to really sit down and think about self-care, caring for yourself. What does it look like? What are the steps? What are the daily things you do that are self-care? Many of us, when we actually sit down and think about this, we're going to recognize there aren't a lot of things that we're doing that are actually geared toward caring for ourselves. And those things that we thought were are actually not quite filling that definition. So this gives us an opportunity to change that, to start focusing on this as a positive journey, not a getting rid of all the things you love journey, or doing things that are hard journey. This is self-care. This is the good stuff. So I encourage you, after you listen to this, start reflecting on what is your self-care. And tying this back to the earlier question of, does it ever get easier to fast or to eat differently or to do things differently than those people around me? I encourage you to be open to the idea that self-care may mean that sometimes, even though it doesn't feel easier, it's still the good self-care thing to do. It's still a gift that you can give yourself. And I think by reframing that aspect of it, the fact that it didn't necessarily get easier to do, that it might not be easier right now to not break this fast early because everyone else is eating, even though that may not have gotten easier, it now feels better making the decision to follow through with the plan because you know you are really committing to self-care. All right, everyone. I hope that both of these topics today and the way that they kind of weave together is useful for you. And I will look forward to coming back again soon with another episode for you. Until then, happy fasting and take good care, everyone.